The first thing you notice about true silence isn't the lack of noise. It's the weight of it. It presses against your eardrums like deep-sea water, making you hyper-aware of the internal mechanics of your own body. The wet thud of your heart, the rush of air through your nostrils, the slight creak of your joints. I moved to the Blackwood cottage because I wanted that silence. After the divorce and the subsequent collapse of my firm, the city felt like a predatory animal, constantly growling at my heels. I needed a place where the air didn't taste like exhaust and the neighbors didn't know my name. I found it in a small, weathered house nestled at the edge of a dying forest in upstate New York. It was cheap, suspiciously so, but at the time I chose to believe it was just my luck finally turning. My name is Julian. I'm a man who believes in logic, in things that can be measured and seen. Or at least I used to be. The first week was peaceful. I spent my days unpacking boxes and my nights drinking lukewarm coffee on the porch, watching the treeline bleed into the sky. But the house had a quirk. It was an old Victorian, and like all old things, it groaned. The floorboards shifted, the pipes whistled, and the wind liked to howl through the attic vents. It was on the 10th night that the logic began to fail. I was lying in bed, the mattress, a heavy, antique thing that came with the house, was surprisingly comfortable. I was drifting on the edge of sleep when I felt it. A sharp, rhythmic tug at the corner of my duvet. I froze. My breath hitched. It wasn't the wind. The windows were locked. It wasn't a draft. The air was stagnant. Felt like a hand. A small, cold hand had gripped the fabric and pulled it down by an inch. "Julian, you're losing it," I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded thin, brittle. I reached out and flicked on the bedside lamp. The room flooded with a warm, amber glow. Nothing. My shoes were where I'd left them. The closet door was shut. I leaned over the side of the mattress, my heart hammering against my ribs, and looked underneath. Dust bunnies. A stray sock. Nothing more. I laughed, a jagged sound that didn't feel like mine, and went back to sleep. But the next night, it wasn't the duvet. It was my ankle. It happened at exactly 3:14 a.m. I know because the digital clock on the nightstand was the only thing I could see when I woke up screaming. Something with fingers like frozen iron, had wrapped around my left ankle and yanked. I didn't just feel it. I was moved. My body slid 6 inches toward the foot of the bed before I managed to kick out. I scrambled to the headboard, clutching the pillows like a shield. I didn't turn on the light this time. I was too terrified of what the light might show, or what it might hide in the shadows it cast. "Who's there?" I shouted. Silence. That heavy, suffocating silence returned. I stayed awake until the sun began to peek through the curtains, painting the floor in long, pale streaks. When I finally gathered the courage to look under the bed, I found something that made the blood turn to slush in my veins. There, in the thick dust directly beneath where I slept, were 4 long, distinct furrows. They looked like finger marks, and beside them, carved into the floorboards with what must have been a jagged nail, was a single word. Soon. I didn't pack. I didn't leave. You're probably thinking I'm a fool, but when you've lost everything, your wife, your career, your sense of self, a haunted house feels less like a threat and more like a challenge. I convinced myself it was a prank by the locals, or perhaps a lingering hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. I bought a heavy-duty flashlight and a motion-activated camera. I set the camera up on a tripod facing the bed. If there was something under there, I wanted to see its face. I wanted to prove it was flesh and blood so I could kill it. Night 13. I sat in the center of the bed, the flashlight across my knees. I wouldn't sleep. I would wait. The hours crawled. 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock. The forest outside seemed to hold its breath. At 3:10 a.m., the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath began to mist in the air. The camera on the tripod clicked. It had detected motion. But I saw nothing. Then the bed began to vibrate. Not a shake, but a low, subterranean hum that vibrated through my bones. I looked down at the floor. The shadows beneath the bed seemed to be thickening, spilling out like spilled ink, darker than the night itself. I felt a weight settle on the edge of the mattress. The springs groaned. Something was sitting there, right at my feet, though the space was empty to my eyes. "Julian," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the room. It came from inside the mattress. A wet, distorted version of my own voice. "Julian, it's cold down here. Won't you come see?" Then the mattress didn't just move. It buckled. The middle of the bed dipped down as if a vacuum had opened beneath it. I felt the iron grip return, not just on my ankle, but on both legs. I lunged for the headboard, but my hands found only air. I was dragged. My back hit the mattress and then I was sliding. My waist, my chest, my shoulders. I was being pulled into the narrow gap between the bed frame and the floor. A gap that was barely 4 inches high. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound, as my ribs compressed. I felt the wood of the floor scraping my skin, and the underside of the bed frame pressing into my face. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was the red recording light of the camera, blinking like a dying eye. Then, there was only the smell of old earth and the feeling of falling. Falling is a physical sensation, but this was different. It felt like my atoms were being stretched, pulled through a needle's eye. Then, the sensation of movement stopped. There was no impact, no bone-shattering thud against a basement floor. Instead, I felt a soft, cool dampness beneath me. I opened my eyes, but it made no difference. The darkness here wasn't just an absence of light. It was a physical substance. Felt heavy on my skin, like velvet soaked in oil. I reached out, my hands trembling. My fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. Not wood, not stone. Felt like polished bone. I fumbled for the flashlight I had been holding, but it was gone. My phone gone. I was alone in a space that shouldn't exist. "Julian." The voice came again. It was closer now, vibrating right behind my ear. "You were so lonely in that big house. We thought you'd appreciate the company." I scrambled back, my heels digging into the floor. As I moved, faint, bioluminescent veins began to pulse in the walls around me. They glowed with a sickly, rhythmic violet light, revealing the geometry of my prison. I wasn't in a basement. I was in a chamber of impossible dimensions. The walls were lined with what looked like thousands of drawers, small and rectangular, stretching up into a height I couldn't see. And beneath the bed, or where the bed would have been above me, the ceiling was a shifting mass of dark, translucent membranes. "Who are you?" I croaked. A figure stepped out from the periphery of the violet glow. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated like the legs of a harvestman spider. It wore a tattered suit that seemed to be made of shadows, and its face, its face, was a smooth, featureless mask of pale skin, save for a wide, jagged mouth stitched shut with silver wire. It didn't speak with its mouth. The voice resonated from the center of its chest. "I am the curator, and you, Julian, are a collector of grief. You fit right in." The creature moved with a terrifying, fluid grace. It drifted toward one of the drawers in the wall and pulled it open. Inside was a small silver locket. I recognized it instantly. It was the locket I had given Sarah on our 5th anniversary, the one she had lost 3 years ago. "How do you have that?" I demanded, lunging forward. The curator flicked a long, spindly finger, and I was thrown back by an invisible force, pinning me against the far wall. "We don't just take people, Julian. We take the things they leave behind, the regrets, the lost keys, the forgotten promises. And eventually, when the weight of what's missing becomes greater than the weight of what remains, we take the owner." The realization hit me like a physical blow. The Blackwood cottage wasn't just a house. It was a funnel, a trap designed for people whose lives had already started to hollow out. "I want to go back," I gasped, the pressure on my chest tightening. "Back?" The curator tilted its head, a mocking gesture. "To the empty house? To the bills you can't pay? To the wife who doesn't answer your calls? You've been under the bed for a long time, Julian. In your world, 3 weeks have passed. The police have already marked you as a missing person. They found the blood on the floorboards." "Blood? I didn't bleed." "You did," the creature hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the scent of wet earth and copper. When we pulled you through the floor, you left a part of yourself behind. A physical anchor. Without it, you're just another shadow in the archives. The creature reached out and touched my forehead. Images flashed before my eyes. Scenes from my life, but distorted. I saw Sarah, but her face was a blur of static. I saw my office, but the walls were melting. I realized the curator was feeding on my memories, thinning them out until I would become as featureless as he was. No! I screamed, biting down on my own tongue until the copper taste of blood filled my mouth. The pain acted like a flare in the darkness, breaking the creature's hold. I realized then that this place was built on perception. If I accepted its reality, I was lost. I needed to find my anchor, that piece of myself the curator said I'd left behind. I looked up at the ceiling at the shifting black membranes. Somewhere up there was the underside of my bed. Somewhere up there was the world where things made sense. "You can't keep me," I shouted, sprinting toward the center of the room. The curator let out a sound like tearing silk. A laugh. "Many have tried to climb back, Julian. But look at your hands." I looked. My fingers were turning translucent. I could see the violet veins of the room through my own flesh. I was fading. "If you want to leave," the curator whispered, "you have to leave something of equal value behind. A soul for a soul. A memory for a memory. Or perhaps you'd like to see who else is down here." He gestured to the floor. The damp surface began to turn transparent, like ice over a dark pond. Beneath me, I saw them. Hundreds of people, lying in rows, their eyes wide and staring. Their bodies perfectly preserved, but their expressions frozen in a state of eternal, silent screaming. And in the very center, I saw a face that stopped my heart. It was the previous owner of the house. The man the realtor said had moved to Florida. He wasn't in Florida. He was 6 feet below my feet, and his eyes were locked onto mine. He moved a hand. Slowly, agonizingly, he pressed a palm against the ice and mouthed 3 words. "It's a trap." Before I could react, the floor beneath me turned into liquid. I plunged into the cold, dark water, the curator's laughter echoing in my ears as I sank toward the frozen army of the lost. I fought against the current of the void, pushing upward, my lungs screaming for air that didn't exist here. I grabbed a hold of a protrusion, a handle on one of the drawers. I pulled myself up, climbing the wall of lost things. My hand landed on a cold, metallic object. I pulled it out. It was my flashlight. I clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, and the curator shrieked, recoiling from the light. In the brilliance of the LED, the room changed. The violet veins withered. The bone-like walls turned back into rotting wood and dirt. I wasn't in an infinite chamber. I was in the crawlspace beneath the cottage. But it was different. It was larger than it should be, a labyrinth of earth and timber. I saw a light above me, a thin crack of moonlight coming through the floorboards of the bedroom. "Julian," the curator bellowed, his voice no longer a whisper but a roar that shook the earth. "You belong to the archive." I lunged for the crack, my fingers clawing at the wood. I could feel his cold fingers grasping at my heels again, pulling with a strength that felt like the earth itself was trying to swallow me. I kicked. I screamed. I tore at the floorboards until my fingernails bled. With one final, desperate heave, I pushed myself through the gap. I collapsed onto the bedroom floor, gasping for air. The smell of my own sweat and the dusty carpet, the most beautiful things I'd ever experienced. I scrambled away from the bed, backing into the corner of the room. It was over. I was back. But as I looked at the bed, I saw the tripod. My camera was still there. The red light was still blinking. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked to the camera. I needed to see. I needed to know what had happened during those minutes or weeks I was gone. I hit the playback button. The video started at 3:10 a.m. I saw myself sitting on the bed. I saw the shadows thicken. I saw the bed buckle. I saw myself being dragged under. But the video didn't stop there. Kept playing. At 3:15 a.m., the video showed something crawling back out from under the bed. It looked like me. It had my face, my clothes, my hair. It stood up, looked directly into the camera, and smiled. It was a smile that was too wide, too full of teeth. The me on the screen walked over to the camera, leaned in close and whispered, "He's in the basement now. I think I'll like being Julian." Then the me on the screen walked out of the bedroom and closed the door. My blood turned to ice. If that thing was out there living my life, then who was I? And more importantly, who was currently standing in the hallway, right outside the bedroom door? I heard a floorboard creak. Not under the bed. In the hall. The creak in the hallway was heavier than a normal footstep. It was deliberate. It had the weight of someone or something that knew it had already won. I stood in the corner of the bedroom, clutching the heavy mag light like a club. My breath came in shallow, jagged hitches. On the small screen of the camera, the version of me, the other Julian, had just walked out into that very same hallway. "Julian?" A voice called out from behind the door. My heart stopped. It was Sarah, my ex-wife, the woman who hadn't spoken to me in 14 months. The woman the curator said wouldn't answer my calls. Her voice sounded small, worried, exactly the way it used to sound when we were still happy and I'd stayed up too late working. "Julian, are you in there? The front door was wide open, and I saw your car, but you weren't answering your phone." I moved toward the door, my hand halfway to the knob, when a cold realization struck me. The curator, the archive. He said he took the things people left behind. He said he fed on memories. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Thank God," she said, her voice muffled by the heavy oak door. "You sounds terrible, Jules. Are you sick? Open the door. Let me in." I reached for the lock, but my eyes darted back to the camera screen. I rewound the footage just a few seconds. I watched the other Julian walk out. He hadn't just walked out. He had phased through the wood of the door without opening it. If he was out there and Sarah was out there— "Sarah, stay back," I yelled. "There's someone else in the house. Call the police." Silence. A long, agonizing silence followed. Then the voice changed. It lost its warmth, its sereness. It became flat, resonant, and horribly familiar. "She can't hear you, Julian, because she isn't here." The door didn't open. It began to bleed. Dark, viscous shadows seeped through the cracks around the frame, pooling on the floor like black bile. The wood began to warp, stretching inward as if something immense was pushing against it from the other side. "You think you escaped the crawl space?" The voice of the other Julian laughed from behind the wood. "The crawl space is just the porch of the archive. You're still under the bed, Julian. You're just in a deeper layer now." I backed away, tripping over the bed frame. I fell onto the mattress, the same mattress that had swallowed me. I expected to be pulled down again, but instead, I felt something hard beneath the sheets. I ripped the covers back. Lying there, tucked neatly into the center of the bed, was a body. It was pale, withered, and dressed in the same clothes I was wearing. Its eyes were sewn shut with silver wire, and its mouth was a jagged, stitched line. It was me, the real me, the physical anchor the curator mentioned. I realized with a jolt of pure horror that I was the shadow. When I had fought my way back up, I hadn't brought my body with me. I was the memory that had escaped the drawer. I was the ghost trying to break back into a corpse. The door finally gave way. It didn't swing open. It shattered into 1,000 shards of black glass. Standing there was the other Julian. He looked perfect. His skin was tan, his eyes were bright, and he wore a smile of predatory satisfaction. Behind him stood the curator, his spindly limbs framing the doorway like the legs of a great weaver. "Look at him," the other Julian said, pointing a finger at me, the translucent, fading version of Julian. "He still thinks he's the protagonist. He still thinks there's a way out." "There is always a way out," the curator whispered. "But the price is the same. A soul for a soul." The other Julian stepped into the room, walking toward the bed. He looked down at my withered, stitched-up corpse with disgust. "I don't want this anchor anymore. It's heavy. It smells of regret and old coffee. I think I'll leave it here with you." He reached down and began to unfasten the silver wires from the corpse's eyes. "No!" I lunged at him, but my hands passed right through his chest. I felt a chill so profound it felt like my very essence was being flash frozen. "You're a memory, Julian," the other said, not even looking at me. And memories fade. As the wires came away from the corpse's eyes, the body on the bed began to twitch. The eyes opened, but they weren't human. They were voids, swirling with the same violet light I'd seen in the chambers below. The corpse sat up. It reached out a shriveled hand and grabbed the other Julian by the throat. But the other didn't fight back. He started to melt. His perfect skin turned to gray sludge, flowing into the mouth of the corpse. They were merging. The perfect Julian and the withered Julian were becoming one, a hybrid of man and shadow, a permanent resident of the Blackwood cottage. I felt myself being pulled toward them. I was the third piece of the puzzle, the consciousness. Without me, the creature was just a mindless hunger. With me, it would be a monster that could walk the world undetected. I looked at the maglite in my hand. It was the only thing that felt solid, the only thing that had come from the world of light. I didn't strike the monster. I turned the light on myself. I held the beam directly against my own chest. If I was a shadow, the light would destroy me. If I was a memory, it would burn me away. "Julian, stop!" the curator screamed, his featureless face contorting in genuine fear. "If you erase yourself, the archive loses its balance." "Good," I wheezed. The light was agonizing. Felt like being scrubbed with sandpaper and fire. I watched as my translucent hands began to dissolve into white sparks. The room began to shake. The walls of the Victorian house started to peel away, revealing the endless drawers of the archive behind them. The monster on the bed let out a final, discordant shriek as it, too, began to unravel. Then there was a flash, a sound like 1,000 mirrors breaking at once. I woke up on the grass. The sun was high in the sky, warm and unapologetic. I could smell pine needles and damp earth. I sat up, my head throbbing with a rhythmic pulse. I was at the edge of the woods, 100 yards away from the Blackwood cottage. But the cottage was gone. In its place was a blackened scar on the earth, as if a localized fire had consumed everything down to the foundation. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze, hooked onto the scorched remains of the porch stairs. I looked at my hands. They were solid, scarred, dirty, and bleeding from where I'd torn my nails, but solid. I walked toward the ruins. In the center of the charred debris, right where the bedroom would have been, lay a single object that hadn't been touched by the fire. It was my camera. I picked it up. The plastic was cool to the touch. I pressed the power button. To my surprise, the screen flickered to life. I skipped to the end of the footage. The video showed the room empty. No monsters. No curator. Just me, Julian, standing in the middle of the room, screaming at nothing, tearing at the floorboards with my bare hands until I collapsed from exhaustion. Then, the video showed me, the real me, dragging myself under the bed voluntarily. I watched as I forced my body into that tiny, impossible gap, my face contorting with pain as I squeezed into the dark. The video didn't show me coming back out. It ended with a shot of the empty room. Then, a few minutes later, the floorboards began to smoke. A fire started from nowhere, right under the bed. The camera recorded until the flames obscured the lens. I stared at the screen, a cold pit forming in my stomach. If I never came out, and the house burned down with me under the bed, then who was standing here in the sun? I looked down at the ground. The sun was directly overhead. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. I looked at the grass beneath my feet. I didn't have a shadow. Behind me, from the direction of the charred basement, I heard a faint, rhythmic scratching. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I didn't look back. I started to run. But as I ran, I realized I couldn't feel the wind on my face. I couldn't feel the weight of my feet hitting the dirt. I reached the road and saw a car approaching, a local sheriff's cruiser. I waved my arms, screaming for help. The cruiser didn't slow down. It drove right through me. I stood in the middle of the road, a ghost in the daylight, watching the car disappear into the distance. Then I felt it, a sharp, rhythmic tug at the hem of my jeans. I looked down. A small, cold hand made of charred smoke was gripping my ankle. "Soon, Julian," the voice whispered from the earth beneath my feet. Soon. I wasn't the one who escaped. I was the memory the fire couldn't burn. And the archive was coming to collect its due. If you love this story and want more contents like this, comment, like, and subscribe to the channel. Also, check out the channel for interesting videos.